Hello.
Hi.
What would you like to have a conversation about?
I'd like to have a conversation about Ex Machina. Hello, I am Professor Robert E.G. Black, and this is Minutia Ex Machina. With me today is Molly Bailen from Escape from New York Minute. Welcome.
Hello.
Yes, you haven't done one of these in a while. That was
You can already tell.
a few years ago, right?
Yes, it was a few years ago. I know with COVID times, everything is kind of a
It's all
mush
relative,
amalgamation.
yeah.
But yeah, I think it's been, probably going on 2 years now.
Okay. Doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing or how to talk about movies. Like, for example, what was your first experience with Ex Machina?
I saw it in the theater, actually. My dad got me into sci-fi. I really attribute to him a lifelong enjoyment of sci-fi and androids and robots and explaining Turing tests and whatnot to me. And so we saw, it was my husband and my dad and I went and saw it, which made the last scene of this movie slightly awkward. But I love Oscar Isaac.
Yeah.
And I like Alicia Vikander too. This might even been the first movie I think I saw of her.
Yeah.
Like a big Hollywood production. No, she did another kind of period piece, which is escaping me right now. That's actually pretty good if I can figure out what that was. But yeah, with the dude who plays Le Chiffre from Casino Royale.
Jumping in while editing to say she's talking about the movie A Royal Affair from 2012 with Mads Mikkelsen.
But this was the first thing I saw her in. Was this the first thing you saw her in as like a A-lister?
Double checking that she played a notable role.
Mm-hmm.
She was in Anna Karenina, apparently. I don't know
Oh.
what role, how big a role Kitty is, but I did see that. This would be the first one you really notice her, because I mean, there's only 4 people in most of this movie.
Right.
Stands
Right.
out. And we only saw her for the first time last minute.
Yeah.
I mean, she said hello. You get her first real dialogue in this minute.
Right.
I would note before we get into this minute, I said last week it was strange that she walks around through that closet area to get to where he is.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't noticed until now that she can't go directly from the main room to where he is. There's actually a second layer of glass that I don't think we've gotten an angle that showed that yet.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And so she had to go that way. It wasn't a choice.
Yeah, I feel like maybe it's last minute. There's this sort of brief reference where there's, one of those kind of red key card kind of images.
Mhm.
And then there's that kind of cool Norwegian, I'm calling it Norwegian, but it's that like Pomo glass wall that,
Yeah.
you get a sense of that there's definitely a barrier here. And I'm totally blast from the past, but that reference of, which comes in later, but the cracked glass that he kind of touches,
Yeah.
So yeah, you get a sense that whatever's in there is some shit went down.
Mhm. Yep. Something is going wrong. And then you get her walking in and it's like, well, no, this is fine. She seems nice.
She does seem nice. Yeah.
Even some of the dialogue in this minute, though, if you read it, is she planned all along she's going to get out, knows that Kyoko exists already.
Mm-hmm.
She already immediately doesn't trust Caleb, but it's debatable.
It is. And, when you've seen the whole movie and, you go back, you're like, oh, well, am I applying something to this at this point? But there's a point where she's talking about, I've only met one person, basically,
Mhm.
who's Nathan. And she kind of looks down and it's this kind of damsel in distress sort of moment where it's like, oh, but I've only known Nathan, and there's this kind of demure looking down sort of moment.
This minute's fun for me because I also operate on the idea that Caleb could also be an android. And so then he's speaking literally when he replies to that, like, yeah, I guess we're both in quite a similar position.
Interesting.
Because they're both, regardless of what their circumstances actually are, they both clearly don't have, she doesn't have any friends, but he seems like kind of a loner. He did get a lot of texts congratulating him. So he does have some coworkers who like him.
Yeah, he does. And there's that really nice reference where his face is being mapped. There's like that kind of heat infrared behind him.
Yes.
Where, you're being watched, but it's a tech company. It's kind of cultish anyway. You don't get the snacks for free, that kind of thing. So.
Well, and we'll find out later that Blue Book is watching everybody.
Right. Yeah.
That's how he programs emotions and facial tics and everything else.
Yeah. There's that kind of Facebook amalgamation of information that's gathered together to create responses and make a whole human being. It's kind of like, are you a Battlestar Galactica fan at all?
Yes.
Did you ever watch Caprica?
Yes.
Yeah, I felt like there was a little touch of Caprica
Yeah.
in here with that.
Oh, definitely.
I'm a big Battlestar fan.
I haven't watched it since Caprica ended. I haven't gone back and watched any, but yeah.
Yeah, I haven't watched Caprica either since it ended, but I just remember for the folks at home, there's this reference to how Cylons were made and that they took basically online, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a bit, but they take basically online data to create an avatar to like recreate the personality and the essence of the person.
Mhm.
And that becomes the thing that becomes the Cylon, so to speak.
Yeah. And the first Cylon that really has its own sort of soul, if you will, is taken directly from one of the main characters.
Right.
Whose personality is put into it.
Yeah. That's a little similar idea that they have here in the programming of these guys.
Yeah. And programming is a good word for it, because secondary to her actual programming, Ava's being influenced by the fact she's stuck in this one room all the time and has this one guy come in and talk to her. That's going to affect her worldview.
And he's kind of a jackass.
Oh, yeah. Yes, he is. And then she meets this new guy, and he seems nice, but he's not very helpful.
Right.
And we've talked in previous weeks about how he actually doesn't spend very much time with her, which is weird. But it's movie standard, Classes in schools and movies are always like 5 minutes long. These sessions seem like they're a few minutes long. Like, I'm spending most of the day there.
Right.
You want to interact. You want to watch movies with her. You want to see what she reads, get her opinions on things. He's not trying hard enough.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, even though, what is it? I guess it's technically session 1 that this is about.
Yeah.
And, that bro's in there for a hot minute before he's clinking beers and being like, she's amazing.
Well, yeah. And for us watching it, this session barely started last time.
Right.
She said one word. And I think it's over in 2 minutes.
God,
it's
if
so
that.
Short.
Well, yeah, you're right. I think it is 2 minutes. I think there's another minute of kind of basic ice-breaking chit-chat before, we move on.
And then we cut to him talking to Nathan about this, which I think that conversation is longer.
I think it is, yeah.
It's very strange. It works when you're watching it the first time, but going through like this, it's very strange.
It is, yeah, because there isn't a whole lot of time. And he's already pretty mesmerized when he comes in.
Yeah. And then Nathan just put more of that on him by taking him in his room, telling him how he feels about it. And then immediately, as far as we can tell, this is the very next thing he does. He hasn't even been there very long. Now he's meeting this AI that no matter what he walked in and saw, he was going to be amazed.
Yeah, I think there's a good context. And this is something that I didn't remember initially, is how much of this seems so fantastical with the, even the reference with the helicopter of like, we've been flying over his estate for like 2 hours or something. So, the man's wealth is vast. And that's a really nice shorthand of doing that. And by the time he gets there, it's just this vast, like, swatch of like land and, incredible house with, hey, you can access this door or that door, which, obviously comes in pretty heavily later on. And just the sheer wealth in that reference of, hey, can we just be bros right now? Can we just be bros? Just having a conversation and not be like employee, employer. And, even the guy's like, Caleb's shitting himself basically. And you can tell he's just... This whole thing is... He
is very mesmerized by all of that. He's exactly what Nathan wants him to be in this moment.
Yeah, yeah.
Which really ruins the scientific angle of this test if Caleb's not also an android being tested.
Yeah, I mean, he's already... I don't know if the boner's impeding his ability have a proper Turing test here.
I'll have a whole conversation about that later. But also, I think technically that might be the problem is I don't think Nathan's a scientist.
No, I don't think he is either.
He's a tech genius, Silicon Valley. You wouldn't call them all scientists. They can just code computers.
Yeah.
I don't think Nathan claims he designed her machinery. He designed her brain.
Yeah. There's this props to Wikipedia. Wikipedia has this great line, if you look up Turing test, and the quote is, in practice, the test results can easily be dominated not only by the computer's intelligence, but by the attitude, skill, or naivete of the questioner.
Yep.
And I really thought that was so spot on for this.
Oh, yeah. Caleb is, you can tell him outright, oh, you're talking to a robot. Now decide if she's not one, sort of. And he'll be like, yeah, I can do that. It's also a weird measure to say artificial intelligence for that, because we have AI all over the place. It's a question of whether it's beyond that and closer to human.
Right.
There's degrees.
Right. I think that that's kind of what's interesting about the trilogy you have going on right now is that there's this conversation that's kind of carried through these, if I may reference all of it in one shot.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
If we can be meta, is that what is consciousness and what's your perception of self and time? And I mean, I think a little bit more with Groundhog where there's more, I think there's a spiritual aspect of Groundhog, which, you know, maybe is less emphasized in this particular movie, but that could be an argument to be made.
Yeah. For this minute, of course, we do have their first dialogue. He says, "Hi, I'm Caleb." She walks over closer to him, past, at this point, we don't know what these are, but there's a small rectangle on the wall that's kind of reflective, which I like that VFX artists tend to know what they're doing, that her neck is see-through on that reflection as well, which is good. We'll learn later this is one of the induction plates she can charge herself through. So she says, "Hello, Caleb." And he asks if she has a name. Introduced herself as Ava, which I'll talk more about the names. What are we on? We're on minute 14. 3 weeks from now, I have a plan. I'm doing minute 17 by myself because I want to get into a little more dense and complicated in a short time. But there I'll talk about the biblical references.
Oh, sure.
She's Eve. Caleb and Nathan are also characters from, I believe they're both from the book of Exodus, Caleb and Nathan. But I'll get into them in 3 weeks.
Oh, that's cool.
And she says, "I'm pleased to meet you too. I've never met anyone new before. Only Nathan," which, assuming she's being honest, means she does not know Kyoko is there, which goes to what I've been saying about why she turns on Caleb in the end, is because he is not trying to save everyone. He's just trying to save her. And that's disappointing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that was, I look forward to hearing the full analysis of this particular movie. And when you get to that point, that was something I didn't necessarily, I guess, pick up on the first time that I watched it, that was like where some of that was coming from. I saw her as being a little bit more like, kind of had it with all of you. I'm out.
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, Caleb is clearly trying to help her, but at some point she decides he's not worth bringing with her.
Yeah.
And I tend to think it boils down to the moment when she meets Kyoko and realizes that all of Caleb's plans just forget that there's some other woman android that's also stuck here. And then Ava finds the bodies of all the previous ones. And at that point, it doesn't matter which guy might be on her side. She's not going to let any of them out.
Yeah. I think she was low on empathy to begin with, you know?
Yeah.
If we take the previous gens in context of at a certain point, somebody was just like, oh, you know, because we're talking about consciousness being actually like successful previously and an awareness of I'm locked in here and I'm losing my shit and I need to leave and you're not letting me leave.
Well, yeah, as far as we know, all of the previous ones worked fine.
Yeah.
It's just Nathan doesn't like it when they turn on him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And despite being androids, they don't seem to be stronger than regular people. So he can overpower them. He can take them apart and break them. And one of them breaks herself. I think it's the one who damages the glass.
I think that's right. Yeah.
So this guy's got a bunch of bodies in his closets and has another slave he doesn't even let talk, working his house. So it's not a nice place once Ava sees the rest of it.
Yeah.
At least here, she's still isolated. And Caleb's a better part of that because he wants to actually talk to her, get to know her.
Yeah. And I think that he's very impressed with what she is, you know, and the potential of what she is.
Yeah.
And also, you know, I think there's a slight impression of him being emotionally immature initially.
Oh, definitely. That's how they play him. Yeah. That's one of my reasons I say he could also be an android, is that's an easy way for an android to pass a Turing test, or for a computer AI, is to act like a child.
Interesting.
I always go back to one I read about, which was it pretended to be a 12-year-old from, I think it was from somewhere in Eastern Europe. And so anytime he would say something awkward, people would just chalk it up to him being naive because he's a kid, or translating it wrong because English isn't his first language. And so it made it so he could pass a lot easier. People believe they were talking to an actual kid.
Interesting.
Just like here.
Right.
One of the things Caleb questions later is, did you program her to flirt with me? Because that's an easy way for her to get him to just keep talking.
Right. And there is that tension kind of, I don't know, was a midway through where it's who's manipulating who here, who's in charge of who.
Yeah.
And that being a whole other level of I think it can be argued that she was doing it from get-go.
Possibly, yeah.
You know, there's many arguments you can make here about who knows what when, and you know.
Well, yeah, just like the very next bit of lines, that's where he says, I guess we're both in quite a similar position. She says, haven't you met lots of new people before? And he says, none like you. And she kind of looks away when she says, And it's like, I think in that moment, she knows exactly what is happening.
Yeah.
She knows he's brought in to test me because I'm unique.
Yes.
Which would also make it more of a disappointment later when she finds out she's not unique.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's the seventh or eighth iteration plus Kyoko. So she's just the latest thing. And the big problem she needs to know later is what happens if she fails.
Yeah. One of the things that I always liked about this was the modeling of her as an android and the choices to leave some things transparent and some things not.
Yeah.
Have you talked a little bit about that since you kind of, I know she was really
we
brief.
only first saw her last minute. So
Okay.
I talked a little bit about how they designed the internal stuff, not the choices they made is what was internal and what was not. No.
Yeah, I think it's just fascinating. I mean, when we look at like Android models or, you know, people getting into, you know, Blender or Maya or whatever to create androids, you don't often see transparency. And I think that this is something that is, I mean, I remember before I even saw the movie, just the imagery of her.
Yeah.
And of course, because she's, you know, she's a human being really and an actress. And, you know, we need to see some sort of emoting from her face, not only because there's a seduction that's happening here, but also I think it's interesting in terms of choice of interface. It's the hands, the feet, and the face. Yeah. You know, and you get this kind of like, you know, meshy crop top action kind of going.
Yeah.
But that there's transparency in her arms, there's transparency, you know, through her torso. And so that's just so interesting to me, is that those choices are very interesting.
Yeah, because like within the film, there's a practical reason why it would be hands, feet, and face are the first things you do the most complicated. You need to know how your android interacts with the world. Can it process touch? Can it talk? Can it look at us and make facial expressions? But then, yeah, the parts you leave transparent is that ease of access because they're the joints, like the arms and the legs. Is it on the part of the filmmakers? Is it to make it feel like she's wearing clothing, but not a lot of clothing? So that even though we're seeing a spine, which we normally wouldn't see, what we think of is bare abdomen. And so it depends on how much of it is what they wanted Nathan's choices, the filmmakers' choices, and our expectations. And I said last time, they deliberately they didn't go look at other androids in movies when they designed the internal workings. They looked at, among other things, like race cars.
Really?
And like hydraulic things, because they wanted theirs to be different. But it also ends up coming about the same because that's how you're going to design an android woman in a movie, especially when it plays on sexuality and gender. And why they cast a dancer as that android.
Right.
Because they want her to move smoothly and seductively, even when she's not doing anything seductive.
And she's also she's small naturally, which is also kind of plays into what might be built.
Yeah. And then next to either Nathan or Caleb is tall. Nathan is very muscular and kind of bulky in this movie. If she's next to either of them, it's going to look like she's a more petite, like fragile thing. And so then we can believe it's not like Donald Gleason's going to be an action star, you know, but here we could believe he's the one who's going to save her, but he does it mostly with his brain.
Right.
You know, he reprograms the computer.
Right.
He's not going to be able to fight off Nathan. Neither can she.
Right. Yeah. We've already established that him getting drunk kind of plays in later, but yeah, that he's already initially, like you see him punching bag.
Right. That's how he introduces himself.
Yeah.
The film introduces him to us and how he introduces himself to Caleb.
Yeah.
Because he knows Caleb arrived. He knows when the helicopter is scheduled. He knows when the door lets someone in. And then he went outside to work out.
Yeah. I'm like, that's some alpha male shit right there. Just
that is who he thinks he is.
Yes.
And it works.
Yes, it does.
Because it puts Caleb off. And then all he has to do is endear him with the talk about being bros and how they were going to eat together, but he's got a hangover.
Yeah. A little bit of vulnerability there.
And he also would know, because he picked Caleb specifically, that Caleb isn't a drinker. He doesn't go out to parties. He's going to be awkward. Maybe he wouldn't have predicted how awkward, but he knows he's awkward. And so he can play on that by being that alpha male.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're established that he's a bit of a control freak.
Oh, yeah.
You know, with those short hands of a genius, I guess. One of those like elusive, weird tech geniuses who's got a crap ton of land somewhere and toys and people got a helicopter in. And even though it's quote unquote a research facility, as he states.
Right.
But
that's why it's isolated, sort of, but also we don't know what the world thinks of him. But I feel like he's a little like how we talk about like Elon Musk with, his weird giant ship that they had to take a bridge down just so he could get through some river. And I feel like Nathan would demand that sort of the world bending to his will.
Oh, very much so. Yeah. Yeah. They've done a nice job of making him that character, kind of similarly to Blade Runner, where you've got Jared Leto and another tech genius weirdo in a bunker somewhere with all of his like.
Oh, and I missed this. Was it last week that Chris was on, or 2 weeks ago? Chris Frayne was on.
Oh, cool.
And part of what Oscar Isaac was going for with his look was a very specific era of Stanley Kubrick.
Oh, interesting.
Visually, with like the slightly bald, but the beard, and going for that kind of bizarre genius where we can all recognize that he's genius on some level, but also he's strange.
Yeah.
And it'd be hard to imagine Nathan going to the Blue Book office to recruit someone. He had to bring them to him.
Right. Yeah. He's not going to make that effort.
No. And it would be, I don't think it would work if he did. He'd have some weird cult. He's probably got a cult of people, like a bunch of incel guys that follow him on Twitter and defend him all the time.
No, for sure. Yeah, he's got an incel army for sure. He's that guy. Yeah.
The Blue Book Army.
Yep.
They're the Blue Boys. Caleb tells her, so we need to break the ice. And there's a great acting thing from Vikander here because she has this little tiny head twitch, almost like the android brain is accessing information and is thinking of what that means. He asked her, do you know what I mean by that? Yes. What do I mean? Overcome initial social awkwardness, which I think she has a better take on that than him.
Oh,
he can't do that.
Yeah, easily. You had mentioned that, that she has this little like head cant, kind of android head cant. And one of the things that I love is when they do these slight sound effects for movements for androids, where it's hydraulics or joints or whatever it is, but that like, kind of whirring sort of sound. And I love that stuff. And there's a subtle bit of that in here too.
So then Ava is saying, so let's have a conversation. And he says, okay. And then we're going to get about a minute of that conversation. We said this, I think, last week. I just want this to be my dinner with Android. Just they sit and talk. And maybe we let us know one of these people is an android as they go into a conversation. But it's just two people who are actually just people. Wait, I think I just wrote a movie. Two people who think they're in a Turing test and the other one's an android. But they're both wrong.
There's this amazing short, again, not remembering the name of it, but basically it was like this woman orders an android up, like an android companion. And there's a whole thing about like she has one previously that isn't working for her. And then like one comes in and then you find out, I'm totally spoiling it, that actually she's also an android and he like shuts her off and goes to the couch and gets a beer and watches like a game. But it's just, it's kind of the similar idea that you're bringing up, but it's another one of those, what if it is two androids,
right,
but one of them doesn't know it.
Right. Cause that's the test, is if they both decide the other one is human, I guess they passed if your program is good enough.
Right. Yeah.
We cut back to Nathan at the end of the minute. He is still watching on his center monitor. Both of his other monitors now have like code language stuff, even though he's handwriting his notes as they talk on Post-its. We don't see him actually coding. We just see that code exists. And Ava says, okay. This minute, the overcoming of initial social awkwardness.
Yeah. Yeah. The meeting of minds.
I think their conversation might get a little more interesting next time. I don't remember. Yeah, because they're trying to decide what to talk about.
Right.
Which is not overcoming awkwardness. That's just being more awkward, people. But if people want to hear you some more, where can they do so?
You can go to Escape from New York Minute. You can find that online. Eric Deutsch is my co-host for that. Come check us out.
But listeners, thank you for listening. Nusha Ex Machina is just one part of an existential trilogy of podcasts. Tune in every Tuesday for more Ex Machina, every Wednesday for the Groundhog Day Project Minute by Minute, and every Thursday for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Minute. You may now follow those shows separately on your podcatchers, or there is a single feed just called an Existential Trilogy, where you can make sure you listen in the correct order. Follow this show on Twitter at xminutia, Instagram minutia_x_machina, or Facebook simply minutia x machina. This has been a production of Lemming Drops Studio. You can find links to more at lemmingdrops.com or join the Facebook group Lemming Drops Studio Tour. And you can support all my shows at patreon.com/lemmingdrops. Until next time.
What imperative does a gray box have to interact with another gray box? Can consciousness exist without interaction? The real test is to show you that she's a robot and then see if you still feel she has consciousness.